Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. I just wanted to do a quick video. I think we did not have enough time this morning in class and just wanted to note a few takeaways. I'll also post the PowerPoint for you, but just a few things. The structure of the Christian church, you can see kind of on the right here with this hierarchy that is the Pope is really the head of the Christian church, and before 1054 in the Schism, the Pope is really the authority for the entire church, although Byzantine largely rejects that and sees the Pope as one of many patriarchs that kind of share some of the rule. So that's one of the issues between the two parts of Europe. But you can see that there's other figures too within the church authority system, so cardinals, archbishops, bishops, and then priests. And priests would be the individuals who would be leading churches during the time period of the Middle Ages, and they'd be interfacing with the people in Middle Ages villages, and the bishops and the archbishops would just kind of serve over a larger space. So, to this day, the Roman Catholic Church is organized, kind of in a geographic sense, that there's bishops and archbishops that have oversight over kind of broader and broader parts of the church community. There is this idea of monasticism or monks, and monks become a religious order that is not on this list. Monks are not necessarily individuals who have the power to institute sacraments, so they're not necessarily part of the church, but they are committed to the practice of religion. And so monks, in a way, kind of embody the sense of what Christianity is all about. They're kind of the individuals in society who have connected most of their lives and vowed to dedicate their lives to religion, and they also serve a great deal of the social system. So they're providing for the poor, serving children, that type of thing. In the Western tradition, we see a great deal of education happening at monasteries, and one of the things that we note is that monks are oftentimes scribing texts. Okay, so one of the things that we did talk a little bit about is this idea of investiture. Investiture is an example of something that might occur between the authority of the Pope and the secular rulers. And lay investiture debates are especially of interest around the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s in societies in Western Europe. So, as a result of kind of the power vacuum, the church and the church authority, it gets extended in Western Europe. One example of this is Pope Gregory VII. His image is pictured here. You can kind of get a sense of a very strong pope. Pope Gregory is not only interested in reforms and making the role of the Pope and some of the religious leaders, very, very clear. He also wishes to grow the range of powers that the Pope might have, including picking other religious leaders, basically picking the people who are going to be serving as bishops or archbishops in the church. That process of picking leaders and having those leaders kind of designated for the church is known as investiture. And it's always a debate over who should have the power of investiture. Does that go to the secular ruler, the rulers who are political rulers, or does that go to the Pope? Okay, so in the case of Gregory VII, he mandates these are decisions made by the Pope and the leaders of the church, and Henry IV, who is a emperor in the Holy Roman Empire, will debate that, and ultimately Henry IV gets excommunicated, not just once but twice, because he tries to stand against the Pope at the time. And in the Roman Catholic tradition, Pope Gregory VII is looked at as a significant pope. He escalates the power of the church. Okay, so that debate is happening. In terms of the monasteries and monks, and maybe the same could be consistent with some of the nuns, some of the women who are working also in dedicating their lives. One thing about the monks' day, monks generally lived a life of seclusion. Sometimes they took a vow of chastity chastity, so no sex. They might also take a vow of silence, so no talking, and they often spent their hours sleeping, praying, eating, and perhaps work. There might have even been some work activities such as digging ditches, gardening, outdoor activity, a great deal of kind of reflection and meditation as a big part of kind of the monk's day. And some of the monasteries are so incredibly isolated from society, so they kind of provide this different type of lifestyle, but there is a social aspect. And one of the things that we know monks are really involved in doing, especially in Western Europe, although this process is also happening throughout Byzantine in a very big way, and in the Islamic Empire too, in an even bigger way, which is the writing of texts. And in the Western European side of things, the product that's used is mostly vellum, which is animal skin. And a lot of the manuscripts that are copied are done by monks who are writing throughout the day to copy these texts, generally so that there are multiple copies of a common manuscript. Usually these are religious texts, and sometimes they are also illuminated. They have drawings in them because literacy rates were not necessarily high, so there's efforts to make the manuscripts beautiful but also readable. And monks are largely that educated class. Something that's very different in Byzantine. So just a few things that are different in Byzantine as the timeline continues and Christianity changes. And arguably it's different in different places within Byzantine. So, recognize these are really some broad generalizations, but education in Byzantine tends to be state organized. So there's some funding and some coordination of education. Literacy rates are higher in Byzantine, and there is kind of a need to know basis. Some people will learn bookkeeping or accounting or simple math because they're involved in an activity in Constantinople that needs those particular skills. So sometimes people are accessing school essentially for a particular purpose, but there is also this sense that there is some intellectual discussion and debate even amongst individuals not involved in the religious roles. Some of this debate is kind of what we would recognize as a blend between classical Greek texts, which predate Christianity, and Christian texts, right? Whereas in the West, the dominant text and the dominant type of source of knowledge is largely biblical or Christian texts. In the case of Byzantine, we have a variety of different authorities that are kind of serving the knowledge base, and it creates maybe a little bit more of a discussion about some bigger questions, okay? And that's perhaps really important. There's a great deal of philosophy and humanities discussion, ethics, and things like that in the society of Byzantine. In terms of the church, there is always this significant aspect of Byzantine society where the emperor sees him or herself, above the church leadership. And of course, that is going to contradict the way in which the Western part of Europe sees the Pope, right? Who has more power, the Pope or the Byzantine emperor? Depending on which side of Europe you're on, you get a different answer to that question, right? One of the ways that we see this escalate is the example of iconoclasm in the 700s. Leo III, who was an emperor at that time, Leo III comes in and basically destroys or bans icons, okay? An icon looks like this. There's a religious representation of divinity. So whether saint or maybe Jesus Christ, there is some sort of depiction of a divine figure. We can recognize this is a divine figure because of the halo, the gold in the background. There's a little bit of abstractness to this, very typical in Byzantine art, but that icon is something that people in Byzantine, a lot of church leaders, heavily used and loved. And so when the emperor says no more icons, this is a huge debate within Byzantine. People within Byzantine want their icons, and there's actual kind of activity on the streets over what happens to these icons. The Pope, and the religious leadership within the West will also weigh in on this. And they don't weigh in on the side of the emperor, they weigh in on the side of the Byzantine people. So in the 700s, this is hundreds of years before 1054 and the actual split of the church, iconoclasm is like a really big wedge issue where the West takes it up, with the emperor. It lasts for about 100 years or so, and we see icons come back in a big way within the worshiping practice of Eastern Orthodox tradition or Byzantine Christianity tradition. Today, if you were to go into an Eastern Orthodox church, there's a great amount of sensory experience, very, very visually representative. There's a great deal of iconography that is represented, throughout a church service. There's also a great deal of incense and kind of a very strong sensory experience. It's just part of the Eastern Orthodox tradition, okay? But kind of have this idea as an example of that Caesaro-papism, this idea of, kind of the emperor calling the shots. This is the Hagia Sophia, and, significant because it's built by Justinian. There's a time when it's destroyed, rebuilt. It serves as a cathedral throughout the Byzantine Empire, and ultimately it will also serve as a mosque, then as a museum, and today is a mosque again, something that's controversial and debated within Turkey to this day. But Hagia Sophia is representative in some ways of like architectural innovations, and also maybe Justinian's power. There's a little bit of that kind of represented perhaps in the Hagia Sophia, and also Christianity as a symbol of a priority for Constantinople, okay, and kind of seeing maybe Constantinople in a geopolitical sense as the home base of the church. The emperor has created, this cathedral, the largest in the world, right? It kind of trumps, other cathedrals, including cathedrals in Western Europe, okay? And again, this is kind of the idea of an icon, which is like a visual depiction of perhaps a biblical story, okay? Great representation of individuals who have been sainted in the Byzantine tradition. There are monasteries throughout Byzantine, very, very much similar in terms of Western Europe, in that they are very, very, very kind of part of the society. In fact, Byzantines access their monasteries a great deal. There are significant reforms that happen throughout the monasteries, and the reforms are different and cultural, and maybe not necessarily the same as the reforms that happen in the West, but the advent of the monasteries looking to become a society of, religious individuals is essentially the goal of all these reforms. We do not see the monasteries, however, as like the hub for learning, even though the monks would be literate and might be debating some of the sources. They are not necessarily the place where members of Byzantine society are getting educated. That's happening largely as a function of the state. There is something in here about some of the incredible monks who isolated themselves. There are some infamous Byzantine monks who are known as the pillar saints, people who will sit atop pillar towers for years, in some cases, arguably more than 30 years, kind of removing themselves largely from society. So if we were to look at what is it that causes the schism in 1054, when the two churches formally break apart and are still separate denominations of Christianity to this day. So we're looking at Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholic Church will end up following the Roman Catholic Pope. Pope Francis is the current Roman Catholic Pope. The Eastern Orthodox tradition actually has still a council of patriarchs, including the patriarch of, at the time, Constantinople. That is kind of the distinct difference between Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic in terms of the hierarchy and the source of power for the church. The church, Eastern Orthodox Church, no longer has an emperor. That concept has gone by the wayside, but the group of patriarchs is kind of the the group that still leads the Eastern Orthodox Church. So we have some political rivalry, and a lot of this is about the power of Constantinople versus the power of Rome or the Papal States. There are papal missionaries active in Byzantine, and even as missionaries go elsewhere to places like Russia or to Poland, we see both East and West kind of competing for who else will become Christian. There's some efforts to kind of move Christianity elsewhere, and it kind of gets a little competitive. The iconoclasm movement is something that is still part of this discussion about the emperor versus the pope. There's also some doctrinal differences. So you can see the list here. The nature of the Trinity is heavily debated. There's